Right, so let's have a think about what we would do for exterior preparations before long-term storage or storage over the winter. First thing to consider is where you might store your motorhome. I know a lot of you have only got one place you can store your motorhome for any length of time. But if possible, and if you've got some options, try not to store it under trees, because the bird droppings and tree sap that's going to build up on it can damage the paintwork and be particularly hard to remove, especially the tree sap. If you do have to, or you just quite like the idea, it might be worth investing in a proper motorhome cover. Definitely make sure you get a proper purpose-made cover, because these are breathable, they've got a soft lining, they're waterproof, and due to the amount of flaps and tie-in equipment that they tend to come with, they don't flap around. Unlike a tarpaulin, which I suggest you definitely don't use, because they're not waterproof, they're not breathable. They're usually made from quite a rough plastic material, which even with a slight bit of movement will scuff and scrub your paint, and they're quite difficult to tie down well enough so that they don't flap around and damage your paintwork and scuff your paintwork. If you are going to fit a cover, check the cover for holes. It's a lot easier for water to get in and underneath your cover than it is for it to get back out again. So make sure there's no holes. Give the motorhome a really good wash, whether you are or aren't using the cover, and then consider giving it a good coat of wax, especially if you're not using a cover, because if you give it a nice good coat of wax after you've cleaned and dried the van, then any dirt that does stick to it over the storage period will be a lot easier to get off. Because when you come back to it, the dirt is going to be stuck to the layer of wax that you've left on the van rather than the paintwork, so it's just going to be a lot easier to clean, and it'll offer a lot better protection to your paintwork as well. So yeah, just make sure that the motorhome's completely clean and free from grit if you are going to put a cover on it. So moving on to the next thing that we talk about is your door seals. Now, if you've ever come to a car and you don't use, say, the passenger side of your car for a long period of time, when you try and open the passenger window, it can be really difficult to rip it open because the rubber seals have stuck to the door. So if you just put a thin rub of silicone grease over the rubber seals, don't use any petroleum based grease, because that can erode the rubber. Same with your habitation door and your locker doors. It can be really difficult to get your habitation door open if it's been closed for many months, and that's usually just because the rubber seal has stuck itself to the edge of the door there. So quick rub around with some silicone grease, not forgetting your locker doors as well. As we can see there, you've got the fridge vents on this one. Some vans have got boiler vents as well. Best to cover those up. Now, these have got winter covers that come with them on this van, so you put those on during any length of storage. If you haven't got the covers for yours, then you could use some tin foil and duct tape or cardboard, etc. And moving on as well, locks and hinges. If you can put a bit of WD-40 or a similar maintenance spray into the lock, and work plenty into the hinges as well on your doors. Not forgetting your locker doors as well, the locks and hinges on there. It's really annoying if the lock seizes up, because you can't get in, and it's difficult to replace the lock once the door's locked and you can't get in. So a bit of WD-40 in the locks and around the hinges works wonders over long periods of time. As well as, whilst we're looking here, tyres. If you store your motorhome completely still for many months, then you can get flat spots on the bottom of your tyres, just where the pressure's just been acting on the same part of the tyre continuously for a long period of time. And again, tyres are expensive, so if you can do something to help make them last a bit longer, then we should. So I mean, there's a few ways you can help to prevent the flat spots. If you come back to the motorhome frequently, then you could just move the motorhome a little bit, just so that the tyre goes through 90 degrees. So don't move it very far, just enough to quarter turn the wheel, maybe once a month or so during storage, and that'll just stop all the weight acting on the same part of the tyre for months and months on end. There's a couple of other ways. Some vans have got levelling systems which will lift the weight of the van up. If so, use this. Check your manual first, make sure that your levelling system's suitable for long-term use, because some of them are only really designed to hold the weight of a van for a couple of weeks, and so just make sure yours are suitable for long-term use. Another way is a bit more involved, is you could get some big wooden blocks, some axle stands, and just jack your motorhome up just to take the weight off the wheels. You might not need to lift the wheels completely off the ground. If you just jack the motorhome up a few inches, then that'll just take the pressure off the tyres. You don't necessarily, like I say, have to lift the wheels completely off the ground to take a lot of pressure off them. You can also get these like little plastic ramps, similar to your levelling ramps if you've got some of those, but they've just got like a curved recess in the top of the ramp. You just pop one in front of all four of your wheels, drive forward a little bit, and then the wheel sits in the curved recess on top of the ramp. So the last few things I would consider before leaving the motorhome, especially over the winter months, is the fluid levels in your engine coolant and your screen wash. So make sure that you've got plenty of antifreeze in the engine's coolant, and make sure the screen wash is actually screen wash and not just washing up liquid and water, because if they freeze they can cause quite a lot of damage. More specifically the engine coolant, if that freezes it can split your radiators or it can split pipes. Can be quite expensive, plus when you come back to the van you won't actually be able to drive it anywhere because the coolant system will have failed. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether there's enough antifreeze in the water in your engine's coolant system, but there's some pretty simple test kits that you can get from your local auto factor. I mean, they're pretty easy to use. You tend to take a little sample of the fluid from your coolant tank in your engine bay, and then there's usually, like on the simplest ones, not the electronic ones, there's usually like 3 balls in them, and 1 ball floats if you're protected to -30, 2 balls float if you're protected to -10, and then 1 ball floats like if you're protected to 0 degrees, for an example. So just make sure you've actually got enough antifreeze in your engine's coolant system. I think that's about it for exterior. If you follow those steps, then your van should be in a reasonable state when you come back to it in the spring.